Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine18. Thanks for stopping by my channel. As you know, yesterday I shared my Oracle deck collection as of the end of the year 2019. It's December 31st, 2019 today. And I mentioned in that video that I had been kind of looking through my collection and cataloging things a little bit, so I thought that I would share it. I've also seen a number of other folks whose channels I subscribe to share their Oracle shelf or tarot shelf or collection kind of once a year. So I thought that I would do the same, and this is the first time that it's been the end of the year and I've had a channel, so I've never done this before. So I'm going to share my tarot decks today, and I have had to split my decks into two groups just for the sake of the video not being really long and space on the table. So I decided to just very roughly divide them between mass market and or widely available decks, which I'll show in this video, and then the out of print and or independent decks in the next video. It just was the first way that I could think of to divide up my collection into two that looked like it might be something close to half and half. So I know it won't be precise, and some of the decks actually I didn't quite know which category to put in. So we'll see. It's a rough categorization for part one and part two of this video. So let's just get started without further ado. And these are mostly, again, like the Oracle decks, not really in order. But because of just how my shelves are laid out, there are some kind of groupings again. So in this video, I will share 21 decks in my tarot collection, and I'll list them all in order in which I show them down below. And mostly, again, in no particular order, but I thought that I would show first, I mean, it makes sense, the first deck that I ever owned, and it was a gift from my parents, and it would have been right around when it was published, which was 2001. And this is the Jonathan D. Tarot Pack, which was by Jonathan D. and Shirley Barker. I'm not entirely sure if this is still in print. However, if you search it online, you can find very affordable versions of it. It's in order because I've been looking at it after I had rediscovered it in the back of my old closet at my parents' place. And it's kind of a cool deck for lots of reasons, but one interesting thing is that the minor arcana are color-coded, so the wands are this gold, for example, and you can see they're Rider-Waite-Smith inspired, but not quite, and some of them are quite pippish, so it's a bit of an interesting hybrid in that way. The cups are a blue color, and the swords are purple, which is interesting. I always actually, when I have color associations for the elements, I associate air with yellow, so that's interesting. And the pentacles in this deck are this kind of yellowy gold. So that is my first ever owned tarot deck, the Jonathan D. Tarot Pack by Jonathan D. and Shirley Barker, which I have kept in this little pouch since I was about, 14 or something like that. Thanks, Mom and Dad and Grandma, probably, for that one. Okay, next up, because they're on the top of the pile, is the mini decks. So I have the very mini Visconti Tarot, and this is one that's published by Lo Scarabeo. And this was my first, I think, Marseille-style deck. I wanted to just see if I thought Marseille was something that I could get along with. And I wanted to have a look at a kind of historic deck. I edged it in black, Sharpie, which is peeling off. So it's a very tiny deck. You can see here, compared to the size of my hands. It's a baby. It's smaller than the tin decks. But this was just one that I got because I thought I'd like to see what a Marseille would be like. And this one is it's been redrawn, but it does have the, you know, traditional configuration of the pips. And I've more so just kind of used it for a bit of study than for actual readings, but I do love a mini deck. So that is the Visconti Tarot by Lo Scarabeo in the mini. Next up are the tins. I have a few of the US Games published tins. I have the Smith-Waite Tarot deck Centennial edition in a tin. And the Centennial edition is my favorite of the colorings and versions that I have of the Pamela Colman Smith deck. It is my favorite one, and I love the tin decks. There's a part of me that's like, why can't every deck, regardless of size, come in a tin of some sort? Because they're so good to just throw into a bag. You know, they don't need a lot of extra protection. The tins stay closed nicely, I find. You know, great for traveling or just having, if you are a person who carries a shoulder bag or a purse or a backpack. You know, I always have one tarot deck with me, no matter where I'm going, like all the time. And it is very, very often one of these tins decks that I will choose to take with me. So that is the Smith-Waite Tarot deck, which I have taken up the practice of calling the Pamela Colman Smith Rider-Waite Centennial edition in a tin. Next up, another favorite tin, the Morgan Greer. I don't actually have the full-size copy of this deck, though I would like maybe to work with it eventually. And this one, again, is one of the US Games tins. And it comes with a little white book and is a mini. I edged it in a bright blue Sharpie to go with the blue backs. The only thing that I don't love about this deck is that very conspicuous copyright on the back, though I am glad it's on the back and not the front. And this is a fun deck, very retro. There are lots of good mustaches in this deck. It's, you know, very, very Pamela Colman Smith Rider-Waite based, but much more close up to the faces in most cases of the cards, or shows more detail. These are mustaches. Lots and lots of mustaches, and I like the bright, bright colors as well. So that is the Morgan Greer in a tin. Another one that is very commonly the one that is in my purse. Next up, yet another tin. And this is the Tarot di Maria Celia by Leonard Jim Narciso. And this one is the only tinned deck that I have that is a Marseille deck. The name, Tarot di Maria Celia, is of course drawing on Marseille. Is also US Games and has the same style little white book. It has a aged look that I really like an antique-y look. And I've been thinking about maybe edging this deck, but I do kind of like how, because of the aged fronts and the aged back, like the borders, the edges do not quite really look white anyway, so I might leave them. But I also think that this red would look really cool. And I do like an edged deck. So it is a Marseille. And I really I like the faces in this deck. I like the art style. I like that it's kind of an antiqued looking deck. And it's hard to find, I think, unless you get something like the really tiny Visconti Tarot that I showed earlier, it's hard to find a really good on-the-go Marseille deck. And the tin really does it. And I just love the colors of this deck. So that is the Tarot di Maria Celia in a tin by Leonard Jim Narciso and published by US Games. The tins just keep on coming. I have one more tin. 10 minutes just on tin decks. And that is the Aquarian Tarot, by David Palladini. And this is another deck, like the Morgan Greer. I don't have the full-size version of this. I only have the tin. But I, maybe will be interested in working with at some point. And this one is a bit funny. The little white book for this deck is this like weird kind of fold out sheet as opposed to the little booklet like the others have. It has a blue and white on the back. It has the copyright on the front of every card. Don't love that. I really like the color palette of this deck as well. This is another very, very Pamela Coleman Smith Rider-Waite style of a deck, immediately readable if you're familiar with that system. It has this very kind of like washed out almost palette, which I don't say as like an insult. It's just, it's very white, right? Like the base color is very white. I really like that Ace of Rods. So that's another cool tinned deck, great one on the go that I enjoy taking around with me in my bag. I'm trying to keep the deck stacked tidy, but stacking the tins on a soft chair is not working. Next up for tarot decks, I have my very, very special edition of Tarot of the Magical Forest. This is a Lo Scarabeo deck, but my edition is the Kelly Bear edition, which is trimmed and it's edged in green by Kelly. And this is just a fun deck. I love the big eyes on the small creatures. It's like a very slight, like not creepy, but just like a quirky kind of fantastical kind of deck. I love the color palette of this deck as well. I love the balance between traditional Rider-Waite Smith symbolism and unique symbolism and depiction in this deck as well. Very, very cool, cute deck to work with, and an especially special deck for me, since really unboxing this little package from Kelly Bear was one of my first videos that brought me to making a channel. So that is the Tarot of the Magical Forest, Lo Scarabeo published deck. Next up, one of my all-time favorites is the Next World Tarot by Christy C. Rode, and this is published by Silver Sprocket. So I've put this deck in here in the kind of quote-unquote mass market half of the collection video because I have the publisher, like the widely available one, the mass market one. It did, of course, also exist as an indie deck before that. I love this. This teacher card is the Emperor. I don't know about the teacher, as a rename of the Emperor, but I love that this teacher is surrounded by feminist theory books. And as someone who works in education, these are texts that I'm very familiar with. So I love these, these little things in this deck. It has keywords which I generally ignore, and astrology associations which I don't generally work with at all either. But they're there. The art is very detailed. It's a very large deck. The cards are very large, which is good because the artwork is detailed. But there's a pocket edition coming out, and I've pre-ordered it on Amazon. I haven't really seen anything about it, but because this is such a favorite, I know I'll want to work with it. I just love this deck. It's colorful, it's diverse, it's expressive, it's contemporary, it's a universe, you know, it's a universe that these figures all exist in. And I really love working with this deck. I've done a lot of work, you know, myself with this deck on self-love and things like that. And I find this deck to be a really affirming, supportive deck. Definitely a favorite. So that's The Next World by Christy C. Rode. And I just got it at the very beginning of 2019, but it's copyright 2017, so it had been around for a little while. And I dawdled on getting it. Who knows why, but I love that deck. Okay, next up, I have some of my Pamela Coleman Smith Rider-Waite decks, so I'm not going to go showing too many of these because you will all have seen this imagery so many times before. So I have, this is my second ever deck. After the Jonathan D. Tarot Pack deck, I got the good old plaid back, yellow box, yellow as anything, and they're in order. I use this more for study and reference than I do for readings, but this is the very familiar yellow box US Games iteration of the deck. I have my favorite version, which is the Centennial edition. It's the backs of the Centennial edition. I like the muted colors in this deck. This is the same I showed the tinned version as well. I love the muted color tone of this deck very much. I find this deck is a great reader. And if I'm going to reach for Pamela Coleman Smith's artwork to do a reading for myself or someone else, and I'm not going for the tinned version, generally it will be this version is my go-to favorite. I've also been using this deck to display my cards of the month and cards of the year on my table upstairs as well. I have the Borderless version, again also US Games, and the Borderless version is also the same coloration as the Centennial. The back is a different color. It's more green than blue. And the artwork has been extended actually on the Borderless. So there is some drawing at the very edge of these cards that is not Pamela Coleman Smith's original drawings. So you can see, like, on the original, you wouldn't see the very edge of this cloud, right? But what they've done in making it borderless and extending it a bit is that they haven't added any new symbolism, right? So they just like extend the lines a tiny bit. They haven't like added like new people or animals or anything like that. It's just extending it out a little bit so that it can be borderless, you know, on this size cards with the resolution being the same and so on. So that's the Borderless. I really like this edition as well. I do usually use the bordered one more, but I really like this edition too. That's the Borderless. Okay, continuing on. A more recent edition, and this is the last of the Pamela Coleman Smith that I will show, which is the Radiant Wise Spirit Tarot. This deck is published by Los Scarabeo. There was an earlier version that some folks have that I just missed out on. I'm still bummed out about this. That folks called the Dirty Pam, and it gets called the Dirty Pam because of this shading kind of backgrounds. You can see that it's a recolored version. I love the recoloring, but you can see how shiny this cardstock is. I will admit that I was quite disappointed. I had pre-ordered this deck and had it. I had been waiting for a long time, and it came. because I love the coloration so much, and that's the back. Borderless back, which is nice. But the cardstock is so slippy and so glossy. However, I did shuffle it. I actually just mentioned this in a comment on another video today. I shuffled it for hours on a car ride, and that made it a better shuffler for me. So I've used this deck quite a bit. And that's the Radiant Wise Spirit Tarot published by Lo Scarabeo. Okay, continuing on. Some large cards. Will people know by the red and black houndstooth which deck this might be? This is a big deck. It is my only round deck. And it's the Gorgons Tarot by Dolores Fitchy. This is the back. And I really like this deck. This feels like a really feminist deck to me, which is something that I look for. It has one extra card, which is the Blind Gorgon. It's very glossy. This is huge. Bigger than Next World, I think. And I love that this is... it's like a really old school computer animation. So you can tell it's done on a computer, but it's not photoshopped or anything like that. It's almost like it's done in paint, right? And I love that style. It has a very few splashes of red, but it's very predominantly a black and white deck, which I like. There are many body shapes and sizes in this deck, which I appreciate. There are so many good patterns on the clothing in this deck, which I like. There are a lot of little animal friends in this deck, which I like. Like, look at that fish print. Like the fish print jacket on the Knight of Cups. How great is that? And I really wanted to try working with a round tarot deck. And I've looked at a number of them. And this is the one that really appealed to me the most. And I like working with the round deck. I've mostly just worked with it upright. You can work with it with different kind of rotations, meaning different things, which I've tried. But this one I have been reading mostly just uprights. So, and I keep the book in there as well. It comes in a quite large box, but I keep the large boxes, but then when I shelve them, I like to put them in bags so that they take up less space. So that is the Gorgons Tarot by Dolores Fitchy. Next, one of the very early additions to my collection is the Gilded Tarot by Ciro Marchetti. And Ciro Marchetti has a number of decks, and this is, I think, this may be his oldest deck, actually. And it comes with a guidebook written by Barbara Moore. It also comes with some cards that have some spreads on them, things like that. And there's a lot of things that I like about this deck. I like the back. Jewel tones are my favorite colors, and so I like it for that reason. It feels a little bit... Oh, the box is just like doing weird things on the table here. The style is like a little bit steampunk. To me, it's like a little bit mechanical. But it's also kind of medieval at times. Lots of, as you can see, lots of golds. Come on, camera. And it has some color coding with these gems around the edge. So it's a good deck to learn with, I would say. Yeah. So that's Ciro Marchetti's Gilded Tarot. And this one was published by Llewellyn. My version. I'm not sure if it's been on ever other publishers before, but my version is Llewellyn. And I've had this deck for many years now. Okay, now I'm on to the last pile here. I have the Steampunk Tarot, which is by Barbara Moore with illustrations by Ali Fell. And I have the Czech language edition of this deck. The Czech edition is published by Synergy Publishing. It has a good hard box. I found my copy on eBay, and I bought this for myself for my birthday. I do not speak Czech, so this chunky guidebook is of no use to me whatsoever. But I did get, there's a Steampunk Tarot app, and the app has the text of the full guidebook, so I got that. And the reason I went for the Czech edition, as opposed to the English edition, is that the English edition doesn't have this amazing copper gilding. And that really appealed to me. Here's the backs. And I love steampunk literature a lot. So this deck, just style-wise, really appeals to me. It's very Pamela Coleman Smith Rider Waite inspired, but set in a steampunk setting and context. So there's lots of gears, there's lots of monocles, there's lots of kind of aviation type garb, you know, all the hallmarks of steampunk style. And I think that this deck, this is one of a few decks in my collection that I would say, while simultaneously being very, very, very much in a Rider-Waite-Smith tradition, also has a lot of interesting symbolism that's very much unique to this deck, that really adds to it. So you can see, just pulling one card out, the 10 of Wands, you know, you see the carrying of the burden, but you also see the tarot cards falling as the person makes their own way into the night. There's also a lot of more feminine presenting folks in the court cards, which is interesting. There's a lot of cards where tarot shows up. You can see the person at the bottom here holding the 10 of Pentacles and the 10 of Pentacles card. And the gilding on this deck has held up really well. I don't always find that the metallic gilding holds up incredibly well, but it has on this one, which I've used quite a lot. Oops. And the deck has one of my favorite features, which is the little thumb holes there. And so it's the Steampunk Tarot by Barbara Moore and Ali Fell, Czech language edition by Synergy Publishing. Okay, continuing on. I have a few more US Games decks here. The first is the Deviant Moon Borderless edition by Patrick Valenza. This is a deck that I wasn't sure if I would like. I knew that I liked it. Like, I know that I really liked the art, but I wasn't sure, you know, about actually reading with it, if it might feel a bit like themey or something like that. You know, or whether it would just creep me out a little bit. I don't know. But I don't find this to be a dark deck at all. Not that there's anything wrong with the deck, you know, being creepy or something like that. But I think that this deck has such a sense of humor, actually. And I edged it in black Sharpie. I would really like to get, here's the back. It's like, I shouldn't be talking about decks that I really want to get when I'm going in depth here of 2020. But but I would love to work with the bordered edition as well, because I like them both aesthetically for different reasons. So I really think that this deck is so innovative. I love Patrick Valenza's art. There's a lot of layering here of textures. He takes photos of different kind of stones and bricks and buildings, and those get incorporated into the cards in really cool ways. The massive hardcover book sold separately that goes with this deck that really gets into the production of it is incredible. This is another deck that I would say similarly to the Steampunk is very closely wedded to Rider-Waite-Smith symbolism, but also has so many little unique gems to find within it as well. I love the kind of dystopian world that this deck creates and all of the creatures and characters in this deck. And it, despite my hesitation, has also just become a favorite. This is also the very odd time that I will do a reading for my partner, who is appreciative of the artwork of tarot, but is a tarot skeptic or non-enthusiast, we'll say. The very odd time that I'll read for my partner, I'll use this deck. And my partner always picks this deck and says, oh, like the death metal deck, that's the one I want you to use. And this is the one that's being referred to. There as that. And I made this bag for it. It's a stretchy, kind of metallic, sparkly fabric. And I know that when the Deviant Moon Oracle comes out, I will add that to my collection too. Big Patrick Valenza fan for sure. Continuing on, another US Games published deck that I was hesitant to add to my collection, but I'm so glad I did, is the Dreaming Way Tarot by Rome Choi and Quan Shina. And this deck is based on the Pamela Coleman Smith Rider-Waite system. It's very colorful. It has these great green backs, and I've seen some other folks edge this deck in different shades of green, and I thought that looked really good. And it would look good with these backs. They have a small white border. I love the colors of this deck. This deck feels quirky to me. There's a lot of good outfits in this deck. I would say that about the Steampunk deck too, let's be real. But there's a lot of great fashions in this deck, I think. There's a lot of interesting prints in the clothing in this deck. I find this deck to be a kind of gentle read for me. I love the clothing though so much in this deck. Lots of these like long pointy shoes, long pointy hats, lots of polka dots. There's something about it that's like very slightly youthful, like maybe it would appeal to a younger reader as well. I really, really like this deck a lot. And I know actually I've never bought it, and I'm not going to necessarily soon. Again, depth here. But I know that the creators, Rome Choi and Quan Shina, have a Lenormand deck as well. And the Lenormand deck is a very similar kind of art style and personality to this. And I think if I, in learning Lenormand in 2020, find that it's a system that I am going to stick with and I enjoy working with, I can imagine the Dreaming Way Lenormand definitely being one that I would like to work with in my collection as well. Continuing on, the newest tarot deck to my collection that I haven't really said anything about yet because I just treated myself to it as my little Christmas gift, but I've been working with a little bit and enjoying, is the Fountain Tarot. And the Fountain Tarot is by... This one is the mass market on Roost Books. It's by Jonathan Sayas, Jason Gruel, Andy Todaro, and Roost Books is the publisher. It has this really nice fold-out magnetic box. And this deck I chose, I'll usually treat myself to like one deck at the holiday time. I chose this deck because this deck had sat on my wish list like longer than any other deck, and I think it's just that when it went to mass market from indie, and I knew that like its availability wasn't going anywhere, it just was one that I never ended up adding to my collection, and so it sat on the wish list. There's the back. And I think that this deck is beautiful. It's all paintings. I believe a lot of these paintings are of folks that the creators know. It's very, again, I said the Aquarian Tarot felt kind of like washed out, like there's a lot of white. This deck similarly has quite a lot of light, though there are some cards that are quite dark as well, but it reads, this deck strikes me as very wintry. And so that's why I thought working with it at this time of year would be perfect. It has also one of my favorite, my card associated with Pisces, and one of my favorite cards in the Major Arcana is the Moon. And this depiction of the Moon, in my view, has to be one of the most beautiful. There are many beautiful moon cards, but this one really stood out. As far as naked baby sun cards go, I do like this one. There's a lot of geometric lines in this deck. They have an extra card called the Fountain, which is like kind of a source of all card. So that's the Fountain Tarot by Roost Books publisher. It has silver gilding. And I'm really glad that I added this deck to my collection, and it's been a really nice wintry deck to work with. Some people say it reads like cold. I wouldn't say that. I just think something about the color palette feels airy and a bit wintry to me. So that's the Fountain Tarot, and the cards are like, the cardstock is good. It's a really good like overall production. I really like that deck. Only 3 decks to go in this half. The next deck I have is not in the original packaging that it came in. This is the Neo Tarot by Jericho Mandibur, and I have a walkthrough of this deck and a detailed review of this deck. It's a deck that I like a lot. It's focused on kind of self-care activities, and I actually have the deck still in order from when I did that review, or when I last put the deck away, rather. The one thing I don't like about this deck is like the cardstock feels like the cardstock feels like it's made out of cereal box, actually. Like it's very, very cardboardy. And folks will know, if you've watched my or somebody else's review of this deck, that when you buy it, the book is glued to the box. So I had to kind of extricate the book and reback it. But I fell in love with this deck when I saw it, and I've really enjoyed working with it. It has so much diversity in this deck that feels really effortless. It doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel tokenizing or any of those like crappy things that it can feel sometimes. It has a lot of diverse body shapes, which a lot of decks don't, which I really, really appreciate. I really just like the style of the artwork. It's very like solid colors. The guidebook is really good. The guidebook is like worth getting even on its own. You can't get it on its own because it's glued to the box that the deck comes in. But even the guidebook for this set is really, really good, with lots of different self-care activities and affirmations in it. This is the back, which I like. It's very neutral feeling. I really like the color palette on this deck. It feels like a very balanced deck in a lot of ways. Yeah, I would buy this deck again if it came out on better cardstock, because it is like This is the only thing that I don't like. You can see like it's chipping. Maybe you can't see that, but it's, yeah. But the Neo Tarot is an awesome deck. And I've really enjoyed working with it. Okay, last two. I have one that actually the art kind of reminds me of the Neo Tarot a little bit, and that's the Spirit Within Tarot by Stephen Bright. And I know Stephen Bright has a YouTube channel and a beautiful, beautiful Instagram as well, and has written some tarot books too. There's Stephen on the inside. And this is a Schiffer deck. So it has the nice box with the ribbons that opens out, but also has the very glossy cardstock. And here's the back. And it's a person from the world card repeated in a circle on the back. This deck I think is brilliant for a number of reasons. Stephen has done all of the figures in this deck as silhouettes. And that kind of, I think, adds a timeless quality to it. So you don't get, clothing, for example, can either, read really contemporary and then get really dated really quickly, or can be really period looking. You don't get that with this deck because they're silhouettes. Similarly, it's very kind of neutral in terms of like ethnicity, even in terms of gender in quite a few of the cards as well. It's a really good approach, I think. Oh, I have cards that are reversed. There are some things in this deck that are very contemporary. Like I think there's a electric lawnmower, and there's skateboarding and and things like this that do make it a firmly contemporary deck in some ways. I really like the cards that are a bit further away. Let me see if I can find an example. But I really, really like this deck. I think that it's very, very well done. I really enjoy working with this deck. Here's one example of a far away one with the Hanged Man. I really like the way that the fonts are done at the bottom in the very readable in the bolded white, and then in the larger text below. I really like that. I think that this deck would be very approachable deck for beginners. It's also quite Rider-Waite-Smith informed deck, and it does also come with a book. So Stephen has this book, and it's a full color, which is nice, and you get a kind of first person, the card kind of introducing itself, which is neat, and then a little description of some of the meanings and some keywords as well. So really great deck that I've done a lot of readings with, the Spirit Within Tarot. And the final deck that I will show in this first half of the tarot deck collection video is the deck that I want to work with more in 2020 because I haven't actually worked with it as much as I would have liked to, and that's the Margaret Peterson Tarot. This version is published by AGM Urania. I believe there are 2 versions of this, but you can find this deck, I think, fairly easily. I found mine on eBay. It has the border around the orange backs. And this was a deck that I just, whenever I saw this deck online, like on Instagram or something, I'd be like, oh, I have to work with this deck. The artwork is just gorgeous. But I think I got it a little bit before I was ready. It's quite abstract and quite non-traditional. And now I feel a lot more comfortable with a deck like this than I once did. So this is a deck that I will be spending some time really getting to know in 2020. And there are some court card renames. So here, key 9, that would be the Hermit, is the Crone. The Wheel of Life instead of the Wheel of Fortune. Really beautiful, very elemental feeling deck. Paintings, of course, by the namesake of the deck, Margaret Peterson. So, that is the first half of my tarot deck collection. The first 21 decks as of December 31st, 2019. I am going to get organized here and put these decks away, get out the rest, and share the second half of my tarot deck collection with you. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Have a good one. Bye.